Hello, everyone. Nice to see familiar faces. I also don't know all of you, so it's nice to also see unfamiliar faces. Welcome to our CSO Task Force program for this evening. My job tonight is to introduce our speaker, but before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge members of LA's CSO Task Force that are attending live on Zoom, as well as those who will catch up on tonight's presentation via a recording that we will post and share with everyone. I'd also like to recognize new members of the CSO Task Force, namely Margaret Sanchez, who is Creative and Social Media Manager for CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and Siobhan Burke, Architect and Principal of Lyric Design and Planning. A welcome also to guests joining us tonight, including faculty and students participating in this next round of Pando Days. Thank you for being here. We think that tonight's program will be very informative for the work that you're going to be doing on the next Pando Days. Moving into tonight's program, I'd like to introduce our distinguished speaker. Mark Vandershoff can be characterized in one word: planner. No, wait, 3 words. Expert urban planner. Over 30 years, he led planning in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, first as an economic planner, then as planning director for the region. Later, scaling up to national level, he became chair of the American Planning Association. We are very fortunate to have his expertise in planning and his passion for a better future focused on metropolitan Los Angeles, which he tells me he is no stranger to. While growing up in Idaho, he connected with LA through family members in Alhambra and now South Pasadena, but also by avidly absorbing the culture of Southern California through its music, film, sporting events, and writers such as Kenneth Starr. This ongoing interest in LA led, I think, quite naturally to his current investigation into LA's 13 sustainability plans, which he will share with us tonight. On behalf of LA's CSO Task Force, I'm handing off to Mark Vandershoff to lead us through his research highlights.
Thank you, Hydran, and everyone. I'm going to share screen right now to get the PowerPoint up, and then we'll get started. Okay, this is a material that Hydran has already covered, so I won't go over this. I do want to thank the CSO Task Force for being willing to publish the ebook that I wrote last year and early this year, and also the American Planning Association's Regional and Intergovernmental Planning Division that collaborated in this project. What we're going to do today, this will be a very quick introduction to the ebook, Sustainability Planning in Metropolitan Los Angeles. And we're going to do it in 3 main pieces here. I'm going to talk first about several multi-county regional plans and ask Dean Kubani, who's with us today, the former Chief Sustainability Officer for the city of Santa Monica, to offer some experiences with such plans. We'll also look at several plans specific to Los Angeles County, and Robin Eason, who is with Pando Populous and the former long-range planner and sustainability manager for West Hollywood, will be sharing a response to those plans. And then finally looking at plans that are specific to the city of Los Angeles itself, with Andy Schrader, the former executive director for environmental affairs, health and sustainability policy for the Los Angeles City Council District 5, will be providing his thoughts about those. So here's how I describe the purpose today. The purpose is first and foremost to help participants become aware of the rich array of sustainability planning resources affecting places within metropolitan Los Angeles. I was really kind of amazed to discover how much there was from so many different agencies when I began discussing this project with Eugene Shirley. To make this manageable, we're going to pretend that we all are interested in sustainability from a perspective right within the city limits of Los Angeles proper. Those are the plans we'll look at, plans that apply to that city. But you will be able to see that many of these plans apply anywhere within the broader LA region. And there is information in the ebook itself that provides a lot more specifics about that. It turns out we've got 13 plans we're going to look at. I hope that's a lucky number rather than an unlucky number. But as I said, they fall into the categories of multi-county, county, and city plans. And I do want to say here that I am understanding the notion of plan broadly. Some of them are formal legal plans. Others are more research documents that provide advice about planning. And I'll try to make it clear which we're looking at. But in a very broad sense, all of them are plans, and that's to be understood. Finally, the way I'm going to deal with this is very quickly to just identify one key takeaway per plan. Imagine this as if you were getting ready to read a newspaper story about the plan. What is the headline? All I'm going to give you today is the headline. Again, the ebook is there for you to read the details, but I'm hoping that the headline is interesting enough, and especially when you add all 13 of them together, to be enlightening. So here's a few premises I want to state, first of all. I think many people are familiar with the notion that sustainability involves 3 dimensions. That's usually how it's described: environment, social, and economic. Oftentimes, those are looked at as 3 circles that may intersect or may not. I prefer this diagram, which actually comes out from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And it makes the point that environmental integrity is really fundamental to everything. You can't have human health and well-being without environmental integrity, and you can't have a robust and resilient economy without human health and well-being, as well as environmental integrity. So that is an important premise from my perspective. I actually prefer the term natural systems to environment, because environment does seem to have the notion of something outside of us. We are natural systems along with everything else in our universe, and that is fundamental to our well-being. One other premise, just to keep in mind as we work through this, is that while the term sustainability is used much more frequently, increasingly the notion of resilience goes hand in hand with sustainability. And the more bureaucratic terms that often go with it, mitigation. Sustainability goes along with trying to prevent the bad effects of climate change that we see now more and more frequency. Whereas resilience recognizes that many of those effects are going to be with us, whether we like it or not, and we need to find ways to adapt to them, but they're increasingly intertwined. So let's get started then with looking at regional plans that affect all the counties in your region. And here we're going to start with one of these that isn't technically a plan, but it's really important. It's something that the state of California does for all the regions within the state. It's called their Regions Report. And there is one conveniently for the Los Angeles region, along with 8 other regions in the state. These are updated on a kind of continuous cycle basis. It takes a long time to do each update. This is kind of what it looks like. I think it's useful in each case. I'm going to be showing you the geographic scope of the plan because it's going to be different in each case, almost every case. This is part of what makes things challenging and interesting. People define LA differently depending on their purpose, but this is how the state of California defines the metropolitan Los Angeles. It's all of Los Angeles, Orange, and Ventura counties. And it's a little bit of San Bernardino and Riverside County as well, the developed parts, the parts that aren't out in the Mojave Desert all by themselves. The current assessment was done in 2018. So what's the headline for that one? Well, what I found really interesting was looking at what is taking place now with the new assessment, which for the Los Angeles region will not be done until 2026. But there's a strong emphasis that was not in the most recent assessment on a new emphasis on indigenous wisdom and equity. And the sense that there's a lot that can be learned from indigenous communities that hasn't been paid attention to in the past. So that's headline number one, plan number one. Number two, Connect SoCal. This is actually an official plan. It's official both for the federal government and for the state government for somewhat different reasons. For the federal government, it's the official transportation plan for metropolitan Los Angeles. And for state government, it's the official sustainable communities strategy that is required throughout the state as a part of state law. And this gets updated every 4 years. All right, here's the region for this plan and this agency, the Southern California Association of Governments. This is really huge. It basically covers everything in Southern California except San Diego County. So you see it goes all the way over the Nevada and Arizona border and down to Mexico. It includes Imperial County, which most people don't think of as part of metropolitan Los Angeles, but it is for these purposes. What's exciting about this, the new update is occurring as we speak. It's going to be released this fall. I'm actually paying a lot of attention to this as something that I'll incorporate into an expanded version of the ebook that I published in April. Here's, I think, a really fascinating and challenging key takeaway. The state is now requiring places throughout California to determine the need for housing in a much more rigorous way than they used to in the past. So for metropolitan Los Angeles, defined the way that we saw, they see that between 2021 and 2029, over 1.3 million new housing units are going to be needed. They were calculating that much more leniently, I guess you would say, in the past, and we could get into a discussion of why. Maybe that's something that in discussion we could say, but the old goal for a 9-year period was 400,000 some new housing units. So this is more than 3 times as many as was believed necessary before. You can maybe imagine why. There is such a severe housing shortage. The state said, it's time to stop fooling around. We've got to set, a really vigorous goal for new housing units. This is a big headline. All right, number 3, we're ready? Here's another agency releasing an air quality management plan, the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And this is kind of not as big as the Southern California Association of Governments, but it does go way out into the Mojave Desert in this case, past the Salton Sea. for topographic and climate regions. The current plan, 2022. And here's what I think is the interesting takeaway. You know, LA has done a whole lot to reduce smog since the days when, you know, I was a young person, but it's still the worst smog in the United States. And according to this plan, much of the worst smog now is the responsibility of the federal government, things that they regulate that the state really can't regulate on its own, let alone Los Angeles. For example, freight trains and ships coming into port. Plan number 4, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. You know, access to usable water is a huge sustainability issue. Here's where this agency has jurisdiction. This is another really gigantic agency going all the way down through San Diego, picking up Los Angeles itself, but interestingly enough, not northern Los Angeles County. So this is a weird one where only part of LA County is in this regional agency, along with San Diego. Current plan is pretty recent. And here's the very interesting takeaway to me, and this is a term you really should become familiar with if you're not already. One water. This isn't just something that some agency made up as a marketing ploy. This is an actual philosophy for water management that now is taking root throughout the United States and really throughout the world. It's a way of integrating the various forms of water management that used to really reside in their own separate silos. Stormwater, groundwater, wastewater, and water supply, putting them together as one water and managed as one kind of system. Sorry about moving so quickly here, but that's what happens when you have an hour and just headlines. Here's another one, Southern California Gas Company. Now, how is this possible? We think of natural gas as something that really should be phased out for carbon footprint reasons, but there is such a plan and it aspires to some sustainability. Here's its geographic area. That actually goes way far to the north, even beyond Bakersfield for this agency. Another relatively recent plan, 2022. And my headline is they do acknowledge the need for a carbon-free future, and they are committing to specific actions. They're talking about something called renewable natural gas. You know, it will be interesting to investigate or see what kind of debate there is over how serious they really are about sustainability. But that's the takeaway that I see. So with that, I'm now asking Dean for his perspective on some of these plans and how he sees them affecting his work. And I am just a couple minutes behind the time, so I'm going to give Dean 7 minutes, though. So what can you provide by way of insight based on your experience, Dean?
Great, thank you, Mark. Well, I don't think I'm going to take all the 7 minutes, but I'll jump right in. And I wanted to preface my comments with coming from a chief sustainability officer lens. I wouldn't call any of the plans, these regional plans, a comprehensive sustainability plan. They really seem to be regional planning documents that are focusing on one or maybe a limited set of natural systems or environmental topics. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know, the air quality district is focusing on air quality. The Metropolitan Water District is focusing on water. But I think that does represent, you know, one of the challenges with regional planning is, and trying to come up with sustainable solutions, because sustainable solutions often require cross-disciplinary planning to be effective. And so to the extent that these regional studies are really siloed. If we're talking about air quality and not really focusing on sustainable transportation planning and housing and economic development, it's difficult to achieve sustainable goals in those things. So I wanted to kind of just frame my comments with that. That said, there's nothing wrong with any of these plans. They're actually, it's great that each of these regional organizations is doing long-range planning to address these major problems. And I think from an opportunity standpoint, the biggest opportunity is looking at things at a regional level allows you to look beyond agency boundaries. So you're looking beyond maybe city government boundaries or other agency boundaries, because sustainability issues that affect a lot of people are, regional in nature. They don't stop at the boundary. And, an example of that might be a city that is predominantly a residential city with very little commercial space or economic development space or industry, but they're basically a bedroom community, and they may be a very wealthy community. They're maybe generating a lot of traffic issues in the region. They may be, affecting housing issues and those types of things. But the planning that goes on in that smaller entity, that city, is not looking at those things. It's looking at the economic stability and the kind of health and welfare of the people that live there. But if you really want a sustainable community, you're going to need to be looking region-wide, if not statewide and larger. So the fact that these agencies are looking at a much larger region is very positive. I'd have to say that the challenges that I've encountered with regional planning efforts, I guess my lens that I'm looking through is the work that I've done with SCAG in the past. And I've sat in on and participated in a number of sustainability planning efforts, even before the current plan that they've developed. And really what I've seen with that is having such a broad agency that is, a democratic agency, and they're often searching for consensus, is that a lot of these plans, it's very difficult to get people to acknowledge. Back in the early 2000s, when I was sitting on a lot of groups, there was a lot of debate about the reality of climate change even happening. So having those kind of discussions really precludes having a strong sustainability plan that is actually helping to achieve goals for the entire region. And then the other challenge, I think, with these regional efforts is because they're so large and they involve so many stakeholders at lots of different levels, they tend not to be very enforceable or used as effectively as they could, because a lot of agencies just dismiss them if they don't agree with them. So that can be a challenge at the regional level. But I guess overall benefit I would go back to is that if we are going to truly achieve sustainability, we need to be looking at these issues from regional levels, because they definitely cut beyond individual city or agency boundaries. And okay. Mark, I really like your presentation of these, and the fact that each of these reports are really, there's some very key takeaways that can help guide policy development in local government from these regional things.
Well, thank you, Dean. We could have a long discussion based on some of the really important points you raised, but time is asking me to move on. So let's move into the county now and see if some of the issues you raised are dealt with differently there. I think you're all familiar with the Our County plan. Certainly that's something that Pando Populous pays a lot of attention to, that their projects are based on the goals of the county plan. The geographic scope, this is pretty easy. It's Los Angeles County, you know. In this map, the unincorporated areas are yellow. The municipalities are white with boundaries. Here's what struck me especially about this plan. And this is where, you know, I'm eager to gain insight from people who actually are working with these issues in a detailed way. But I was really impressed by the level of accountabilities that were outlined in this plan. There are 12 goals, but there are also 37 strategies and 159 separate actions with identified leadership by 22 different county departments. Now, you know, I've been learning things about Los Angeles County. I sort of knew before I started this project, but how it is by far the most populous county in the United States with approximately 10 million people. That's more than the whole Chicago metropolitan area or anyone smaller than New York, actually. But and having the 5 commissioners that have so much responsibility. So I'm really intrigued to know, you know, what these different departments are doing that with the assignments that they've been given. But that's my headline, is their detailed accountabilities. All right, moving on to something called the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. This one is slightly amusing to me because it's described as Greater Los Angeles County, when in fact it's mostly a subset of Los Angeles County, namely the southern third of it, basically. And I think this may go back to the fact that we saw earlier with the Metropolitan Water District not really including the northern part of Los Angeles County. This is called the Greater Los Angeles County Plan because some of it spills over into counties beyond Los Angeles County because it's based on watersheds that don't necessarily correspond to political boundaries. The current plan isn't all that recent. I did learn just last week that the county has its own draft water plan that's out now. It's a fairly abbreviated plan, at least what I've seen of it. But here's the takeaway I see that comes out of this water management plan. And I'm being a little bit of a broken record here, the one water, because I want to keep emphasizing that this is something that's a serious policy direction that is now taken seriously, not just at the level of the Metropolitan Water District, but at the level of Greater Los Angeles County. And then here's an interesting one to me too. This is another one that doesn't really constitute a genuine plan per se, but based on the notion that sustainability includes economic sustainability, I wanted to find out what was going on in terms of an economic plan for the region and in particular for Los Angeles County. And so I did discover the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. And it is more of, I guess I would call it a perspective rather than a plan per se. But intriguing to me is the way that they define Los Angeles from an economic standpoint. This is really very similar to the first plan we looked at or the first study from the state of California. It acknowledges that as an economic unit, LA extends well beyond Los Angeles County, although not all the way over to the border of Nevada. And they actually picked this up from a bank that developed this notion back in 1991, over 30 years ago, which they call the 60-mile circle. That if you look at the center being Los Angeles City Hall and draw a radius of 60 miles around that center, you pick up pretty much everything of importance economically in the Los Angeles region. This report that I've looked at is also fairly recent, from 2022. What I liked about this report, this is something I got to live through as an economic planner. The way in which the economic development profession, I think, evolved in some positive ways over time. It used to be that economic development, I'm caricaturing it a bit, but it was all lower taxes, lower regulation, and let's try to bribe some businesses to come here. There's an approach that was developed that came into fruition in the 1990s by an actual business school professor, Michael Porter, that had a much more sophisticated understanding of what makes for a prosperous region and generates competitive advantage. And I was pleased to see this as something that I saw pervading the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation perspective. So there were just 3 plans then that I saw from Los Angeles County that I got highlighted. And so with that, I'd like to turn things over to Robin Eason, to get your perspective on, in your experience, what challenges and opportunities have been provided by Los Angeles County sustainability plans that we've looked at.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. So I'm, I guess, similar to Dean, coming at this from a local government perspective, working for the city of West Hollywood for some time. And beginning with the Our County plan, one of the things that was really, in some ways, lovely about that effort and that plan coming out when it did was, one, the process of putting that plan together was exceptionally comprehensive and very thoughtful. It included, typical stakeholders like LA County government departments that likely got assigned a lot of those actions that you mentioned, but it also included a lot of community-based organizations and long-standing kind of community foundations, in addition to welcomed the perspective of the Indigenous community. And it was also centered and anchored in equity. And a lot of those processes and thoughtfulness around those processes were sort of front and center in the plan, to make sure that folks know all of the knowledge and wisdom that was procured in order to make that plan what it was. The other part of that was that the Our County plan was sort of in many ways a human-centered plan. So when you talk about the 12 goals that it represents, a lot of cities around the Southland do what's called a climate action plan. So a plan that really measures your greenhouse gas emissions within your boundaries and comes up with a plan to mitigate them over time, or discuss how you can adapt to climate change. And so those are typically segmented per technical sustainability sector, energy, water, waste, what have you. The Our County plan was more centered around sort of what is the county we want to be in the future, right? So kind of that generational thinking and heart-centered thinking that you don't necessarily get with those typical technical plans. And so what's great about that is that it really then becomes the steward for what the region looks like over the course of the horizon that plan has projected to look like, but then charges the different groups to lead those efforts to actualize that plan. So it was just a really thoughtful way of bringing together the goals of the county into one document, but then also inviting the various cities to weigh in and take a look at what those goals would be. What was also thoughtful, really quick, was that the plan was really wanting to be a resource for the region. And so there's cities or local governments that can do their own sustainability planning, climate action planning, and then there's others that might not have the resources to do that. And so the county really wanted our county plan to be representative of the sort of potpourri of LA County and what it was, including the cities, but then also be a resource for cities of all resources to be able to then plan ahead or plan accordingly within their jurisdictional boundaries in whatever way makes sense for them and just be a resource in that way. So I think that that was a beautiful effort by the county, and they continue to give updates on how it's going, which is fantastic. The integrated water plan, I think, is something that tends to be used just as a guide for local jurisdictions to understand what's going on in the region. It may or may not be as helpful depending on where you sit within those watersheds, but I think if any responsible agency is planning for the future, they're at least looking to see what some of those regional documents say. And sometimes it can be a leverage point when speaking to various electeds about which strategy to go on based upon what the region says is the priority. And then finally thinking through that, the six mile circle plan, which I actually am least familiar with, but it's a very interesting kind of economic document. I think, you know, the industry cluster approach has been around for some time, and there's definitely merit to looking at the economy in those ways, particularly for a mega region like LA, where you would assume that entertainment likely would be some of the major clusters and some of the ripple effects from that taking place. But if you're thinking about it from a sustainability perspective, there's really kind of segments within the economy that likely might not be explored in a plan like the Six Circle plan. In particular, for instance, there's a trend towards building electrification and building decarbonization. And with that trend, and in order to actually realize a lot of those solutions and opportunities, you really have to start talking about how do you green a local workforce. And, you know, obviously I haven't looked through the 6 mile circle plan, but I'm not sure if it's talking about that or if it's talking about sort of the economics broadly. But when you're thinking through sort of the layers of what sustainability is, that's the integrative piece that needs to be considered in order to reach some of the goals that you want for a particular region, right? It's kind of how you make market transformation happen. And so really making sure that you're taking heed of what some of those plans are saying, but also bringing it back into the fold of what are some of the top goals within sustainability that we want to see done, and how does workforce development, green jobs, kind of that kind of market transformation start to help propel some of those goals forward as well, so that nobody is left behind, but we're also being thoughtful about what it's going to take to achieve some of the things that we want to see in the region.
Wonderful, great comments, Robin, and we're right on track time-wise, so I'm not going to ask for others to comment, but move on then to the final set, city-level plans for the city of Los Angeles proper. So the first one I want to take a look at is something that, of course, we no longer have Mayor Garcetti, but my understanding is that these documents still carry considerable weight. You know, maybe when Andy provides his comments, he can give us an update on the extent to which Karen Bass is following these as well. But I've actually grouped two plans together. They are published as separate documents, but I see them as part of the same process. And by putting them together, it's this notion that both sustainability and resilience are important. So yeah, the geographic scope for this plan is the city of Los Angeles. This is what it looks like, as I'm sure you know. This is a land use map, so that's where the coloring comes from, the standard land use symbols. And the current plan was a product of 2018 and 2019. Here, I just wanted to emphasize that as my key takeaway, the unusually strong emphasis on both resilience and sustainability. And I was impressed reading the resilience plan. I could see where some of that was coming from, in the sense that, you know, there's always been a threat of earthquakes in Los Angeles and the Los Angeles area. And that's something that you have to be prepared to adapt to. And so I think even before climate change was a big concern, the concern with earthquake preparedness was there. But now resilience and sustainability are both tied together in some pretty powerful packages, I think. Number 10, this is the general plan for Los Angeles. It's what people, most places in the country call comprehensive plan. My understanding is that they both mean pretty much the same thing, but it's done, a little bit uniquely in the LA area. Prepared by the Los Angeles Planning Commission. What I do want to emphasize here, the geographic scope, of course, is the Los Angeles city limits once again, but throughout the country, there's been, an effort to really take neighborhood level planning seriously in large cities. And I see this manifest in Los Angeles in 35 identified communities that are actually responsible for land use planning within the city. And so this map illustrates those 35 communities. The current plan, I say, dates from between 1969 and 2023, because there's no fixed requirement for updating the individual community plans at any particular time. So there's actually one community plan that was most recently updated in 1969. Others are much more recent, but not all of them. So that actually kind of gets into my key takeaway. And back to the housing takeaway that I identified with the Southern California Association of Governments plan, that working with SCAG, there has been an identified need of 456,000 plus new housing units to be created within Los Angeles between 2021 and 2029. And I did hear Karen Bass on public TV a month or so ago talk about we need 500,000 new housing units in the next 10 years. That was sort of a paraphrase of this goal. But as a planner, I'm in awe of that as a really high stretch goal, and wondering how on earth anything like that is likely to happen, especially with the community land use plans not necessarily up to date and not accommodating that level of new housing, which is so important from a social sustainability standpoint. All right, once more we have One Water. There's a One Water LA plan coming out from the Department of Water and Power. And that is within the Los Angeles city limits, though divided into, I think, 5 different service areas. And the current plan being, relatively up to date, 2018. My key takeaway, again, is the One Water commitment, but translating that into a goal of 50% of water sourced locally by 2035, which is up from 20% just not that long ago in the late 19-teens, or 20-teens, sorry. So that's an ambitious goal. That gets into things like recycling of water that used to be just dumped into the ocean after treatment, finding a way to reuse it, and not getting rid of it. Plan number 12, a city plan for electricity, electrical power. The Power Strategic Long-Term Plan. This also has the Los Angeles city limits as its geographic scope, and it's updated in 2017 most recently. Here I was impressed with this and, eager to see how they pull this off. This is the largest municipally owned electrical utility in the United States. So that does give it, an ability to align with policy goals that may not be as powerful in places that are investor-owned utilities. They're claiming to be firmly committed to 100% carbon-free energy in the city by 2035, 10 years ahead of the state goal. So I'm impressed with that goal and eager to see how they do to achieve that. Finally, and this falls into the last but not least category, especially when you consider the notion that environmental sustainability is fundamental to everything else. This is not one of those real plans yet, but it's something that I've become incredibly impressed with the more I've studied it. And that's the biodiversity index for the city of Los Angeles. Most recently, a 2022 report. And the geographic scope here, I think, is quite interesting because once you begin to look at biodiversity issues and ecological issues, you right away begin to overflow past city limit boundaries. This is a map of what has been defined as 27 ecotopes for the city of Los Angeles, but many of them stretch into neighboring communities. So, I think these ecotopes are amazing. I've been reading the reports front to back on them, but here they are. This really does require a lot of intergovernmental cooperation if there's to be a strategy built around this. The current quote unquote plan I see is coming from the year 2022. And here's my key takeaway. The only US city, Los Angeles is to adopt as a starting point the international gold standard Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity. That's sort of the international standard. But Los Angeles set out, and I think they've done so very impressively, to improve upon the Singapore Index. But they're quite forthright in saying, we don't yet have a strategy. That's what we really need. And this is especially important, not just for the city, but really for the world as a whole. Los Angeles is the epicenter for the only biodiversity hotspot in the continental United States. And I love this quote from Edward O. Wilson, one of the pioneers of defining biodiversity. Biodiversity is our most valuable but least appreciated resource. Well, I think Los Angeles does appreciate it, and I appreciate that. So very quickly, just, many of you probably know this, but what is a biodiversity hotspot? It's kind of concentrated along equatorial tropical areas. But if you look at this, again, it's the only biodiversity hotspot in the continental United States. It is right there with you. It's the so-called California Floristic Province. And as these maps show, if you look at the map on the left, there's a very strong dark area there, which is the developed area of the Los Angeles metropolitan area mainly, and a lot of fires occurring around it. So, LA is really kind of the epicenter of the California Floristic Province biodiversity hotspot. So I think it's timely that I turn things over to Andy now, because I know he's had a little bit to do with the biodiversity hotspots, but I'll just ask him more generally, in your experience, what challenges and opportunities have been provided by the City of Los Angeles Sustainability Plan. Andy.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your work on bringing all these together. Watching your presentation, it's been a little bit of a yearbook from the last 10 years of work that I've been engaged in. The challenge from being the city of Los Angeles, back in 2014, the Guardian newspaper named Los Angeles as the #1 most influential city in the whole world. And we really took that on as an important responsibility as we were moving forward with all these different plans. We and to show us how influential the city of Los Angeles was, we introduced our climate emergency mobilization office legislation. And then Berkeley saw what we were doing, declared a climate emergency, followed by Richmond and a bunch of the Bay Area cities. Now 2,343 cities across the world have declared climate emergencies that all were inspired originally from our first effort. So that really showed us how influential LA was. So we started to ask ourselves, like Mark said about the biodiversity index, we wanted to 1-up or 10-up the Singapore City Index. How can we make things better? What are we not including? Climate was really seen as the domain of the big greens back when I started in 2013, which means the Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and the environmental justice organizations that really populate the city of Los Angeles didn't get along with the big greens. And the fossil fuel industry really used the division between the Greens and the environmental justice community and labor to kill off a lot of legislation. So we started to work with the environmental justice folks and say, how can we do better? How can we bring everybody together? So when we created the world's first climate emergency mobilization office, we did it with a foundation of environmental justice. And we put into leadership positions indigenous leaders and frontline communities, people who are suffering the most from climate impacts already and the most pollution, and also labor representatives. So then we would be addressing all of these issues from an equity point of view, and by our raising the level of our game, that encouraged LA County to really put justice at the center of their plan, and their plan is really remarkable, and they started from that, and I think what they came up with improved upon everything else because they started with that foundation. But so the other thing that we were missing then was, we're looking at clean energy, we're looking at water, but we weren't talking about the health of nature. And the mountain lion P22 kind of let himself be found back in 2012, and he really inspired a huge biodiversity effort in the city. The UCLA came out with its grand challenge to protect biodiversity, no net biodiversity loss by 2050 or something like that. And it inspired us then to launch an effort to protect wildlife corridors in our hillside regions, especially in the face of all this housing that the state is trying to make us build. And then we started to realize we really needed an overarching umbrella policy, and that's under which that would make sense. We were trying to get rid of pesticides and herbicides and a whole bunch of other things. So we really needed an overarching biodiversity policy under which the rest of this made more comprehensive sense. And so we launched our biodiversity effort. First, we were going to use the Singapore City Index to count and account for the biodiversity in LA, and it wasn't a good fit. So we said, okay, let's make our own, and let's make it better than Singapore's. And I'm happy to report that when the woman who created the Singapore City Index read ours, she said, it looks like we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and improve ours. So we did our work, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished. What we have worked out in terms of strategy and an implementation plan, each city department is now required to have a biodiversity plan. and how can we make sure that each city department's operations are not negatively or adversely affecting biodiversity. And if we show the rest of the world that we can do it in Los Angeles, then we can proudly spread it to other cities and show that they can do it as well. And
Right.
if we're going to have this leadership position in the world, we want to make sure that we're doing all of this right.
Wow. So in the interest of time, I see we've got 2 minutes left if we want to be strict. I hope you understood I was being tongue in cheek when I said Andy had a little bit to do with the biodiversity issue in LA. My understanding is he's kind of the father of it all, but maybe that's a bit of an overstatement to balance off my understatement. But I think at this point, I just have to thank everyone. This has been great for me to learn your perspectives. And I will kick it back to Hydrin to wrap up the meeting, if that's okay.
Sure, I will. Boy, I love the timing. Good job, Mark.
Well, you've got a whole minute left if you
Yeah,
want. So.
well, that's all I need. Many thanks to you, Mark, for providing these insights and for highlighting important takeaways. I know that many of us are going to go back to some of those source documents and check them out more closely. For everyone else, you can download the book, Sustainability Planning in Metropolitan Los Angeles, from a link that's in the chat. If you don't get the link, just go to the Pando Populous website, and under the CSO Taskforce, you'll get to a download of that document. I would also like to thank the respondents who joined Mark in reflecting on sustainability and planning: Dean Kabani, CSO, Robin Eason, planner and strategic sustainability advisor, and Andy Schrader, whom you just heard from, Executive Director of Environmental Affairs, Health and Sustainability for LA City Council District 5. Thank you. This concludes our program. Hope to see you all very soon in person. We're hoping that our next CSO Task Force meeting will be in person, and it'll probably be in the October timeframe. So we're presently trying to put that together. Can't wait to say hello to everyone. Thank you all. That concludes our program. 6:30 on the dot. It's always great to have a tightly run Zoom meeting. Thank you. Goodbye all.
Bye all.